For tonight's webinar, I just want to clarify that we are very much focusing on the transition to the workplace. So we're not going to be looking at CV writing, job search. We're going to be looking at what it's like coming from a situation where you've been used to the education environment and moving into the workplace environment, how to best navigate that transition, the supports you can put in place for yourself, the resources that are available out there to help you make that transition um, as smooth as possible, particularly in the context of being first time going to the workplace for an autistic person. Just to give it a bit of context for myself, I am late diagnosed autistic. I was diagnosed back in 2021, and I spent 12 years in professional services as an accountant. And I can tell you now that if I wish I had known that I was autistic before going into the workplace, so this means a lot to me to be able to provide insights of what I wish I had known going into the workplace as an autistic person. So I hope that you get the benefit of this tonight. Just to say as well, I've this is such a broad area. So I have no doubt that we have people here with varying levels of support needs who are looking to go into work across a whole range of different areas. So it's impossible to cover every particular situation or fact pattern that could possibly arise. There's just so much out there. So the real focus of tonight's session is to just really signpost you towards all of the resources that we can make available to you. The slides that we have prepared are, there's quite a lot of information in there, so I'm only going to touch on various bits and pieces. And just to echo what Mairead said, this session is being recorded and the slides will be made available to you afterwards. So don't be worrying about furiously scribbling down notes or that you're going to miss anything that's said. This will all be there for you afterwards that you can pick this up. So if you need to step away from the computer, make yourself comfortable, do anything to, help you in processing information over the course of this evening, please do so. So just to flag some of the sessions that are coming up over the course of the next month. So obviously we have this transition to employment tonight, but later on in the month, there's also a webinar on interview and job preparation. So that's going to be much more on the job search aspect of this. And then there's some live drop-in Q&A sessions running on the 22nd of March and the 31st of March as well, where you can have much more of the interactive Q&A process as opposed to tonight, which is much more delivery of content. Just to flag as well that we do have the AsIAm employment seminar at the end of the month in NCI College here in Dublin. It is free to attend and it's over the course of the day. The start of the morning is very much an information session, but the afternoon there are some dedicated workshops to focus on CV preparation, job search with facilitators there who will go through that over the course of 3 hours in the afternoon. So if that is something that is of interest to you, I would highly recommend signing up if you're able to attend on the day. So just for tonight's agenda, what are we going to be looking at? We're going to be focusing very much on routes to the workplace, okay? So from the context of where you are right now, the attendees on here maybe finish secondary school, finish further education, finish college, and then how do you get from where you are now to into the workplace, and how do you navigate that in the various routes? Then we'll move on to the resources and supports, and then just some insights, tips and tricks that I've picked up as to how to ease that transition into the workplace. Some general comments then on the sensory environment you may encounter in a workplace, how very often I expect many of you are very attuned potentially to your own hypo or hyper sensory sensitivities. And then it's a case of how do you navigate or accommodate that within the potential workplaces that you can be going into. We may then also spend a little bit of time on typical workplace communication and social interaction issues you may face going into a workplace, and how you can put supports in place to help navigate that. And finally, just some comments about self-care, because I think this is a point that's huge in the context of going to the workplace. It is very important not to lose sight of the important thing, which is you. You are more important than your job. The job should never be more important than you. So we will talk about that. And then finally, we'll have some comments just on disclosure, reasonable accommodations, and Q&A. So on the routes to the workplace, generally there's about 3 different routes from where you are now. Firstly, you can apply directly for a job. So you see a job listing that's out there and you say, I would like to go for that, and you apply for that. Okay, so that's your very typical route to employment. I might just click on to the next slide so you can see that. So that's that middle band. You go through the full interview process, and then on successful completion of that, you've got a job. There are two other routes that are available, generally speaking, for people in your position, which is internship or placement. Internships are generally run by the employer. So an employer may run an internship program that they will make available to graduates that is open for any of them to apply to. Um, Generally, you have to go to find out the employer first and apply directly to that employer via that internship program. And they generally last typically 3 months, 6 months. Very much internships are viewed as, I would call them, long process interviews. The employer is generally looking to see you in the workplace. How do you cope with the job? And then it's kind of seen as a long interview process. On the other hand, then you have placements. Placements are generally organized between an organization, usually a college or a further education institution, and a partner workplace. Placements are very good if you're able to get onto them, because generally what you'll find is that the college, the further education support, or the likes of another provider like a head will provide you with a high level of support in the workplace, in number one, uh, interviewing for the role, obtaining the role, and then ongoing support while you're in the role, particularly if you are a person with a disability, neurodivergent, or autistic, as the case may be, to successfully complete that program. And generally, these placement programs are organized with the intention at the outset that the employer is knows that they're recruiting an autistic person and is actively going out to recruit people with disabilities, people or autistic people, and you find that the level of support in those programs is quite high. So when you're looking at this, you have to weigh up some different considerations. Do you go and do you apply directly for a role? The benefit of that, if you get the job, congratulations, you are now in permanent employment. And if you're able to do that, that is an absolutely fantastic. I would say getting your first job is probably the most important job you're going to get, because it starts a virtuous cycle for you. It's easier to get further jobs in the future once you've got that first job. It's always so important to get that first job on your CV. Sometimes, though, it may be difficult to get that first job if you're applying for it directly, because that interview process can sometimes be harder than the interview process you might find in an internship or a placement program. So, just flagging there, while placement programs and internships will generally pay less, getting into an internship or placement program and the interview process that goes with that is usually a lot easier. And once you actually get that internship or placement, it gives you very valuable experience for your CV, which then you can leverage to actually go into another job once it's on your CV. Or what you find is that very often employers, if at the end of the placement or the internship, they quite like you, they would very often offer you a position without necessarily going through another formal, intensive interview process. And as you know, as autistic people, it is the interview process that we often find is the biggest barrier for an autistic person to get into the workplace. So if you are able to show through actual work experience, through that internship or placement process, you know, the value you can bring to the employer in that way, they see it. They don't need you to necessarily go through another interview process that you may be difficult for you. So that's where the real value of the internship and placement processes come through for autistic people. It's that you can really show what you can do without the barriers that the typical traditional interview process places in front of us. And the other aspect then, as I said, for placement programs, particularly for those of you who are attending college or university right now, the college generally provides a high level of support. And if you are doing the program, WAM program, so the Willing Able Mentoring program with the head, which is a fantastic program, it's a 6 month, minimum 6 month paid placement organized between a head and the partner organization, and they have a wide range of partner organizations. They will do a workplace needs assessment with you before you join the employer. Reasonable accommodations will be agreed with the employer prior to you starting that employment. So that level of support is excellent. And I would just also say there was a session last night organized between Ahead and AsIAm, and I believe that session is now available online. If it's not available online, it will be available online, and the recording has been circulated, and we can arrange for that recording and slides from last night's session to be circulated to the attendees here tonight, because I think that session really shows what the WAM and Ahead placement program can do better than I can explain. So then when we go into then just the resources and supports that are typically available, well, first off is AsIAM's information line. So obviously, if you have any questions whatsoever, contact us. So the information's there. You can give us a phone call, drop AsIAM an email. If you have any questions or queries for your particular fact pattern, and we will help. AsIAM, will help as best we can. Then there's also the AsIAM employment program for autistic job seekers. So this is employment groups and one-to-one career clinics that provide a real level of intensive support for you. As I was saying before, the CV creation, cover letter, interview preparation, even just career coaching about what type of job you may wish to go for. What is it that you actually do want to do? And that support is there as well. So, for instance, they have the employment groups, which is the 4 session program. So one is job search strategy, session 2, the CV development and application letters, session 3, the neurodiversity in the workplace. And that's to kind of give you a broader understanding of what the neurotypical colleagues in the workplace may perceive. And then session 4 is interview skills. So the next aspect then is the career clinics. So these are online or in person, and there is a full listing online at AsIAm right now where you can go on and you can book in via Calendly. If you would like to engage in one of these clinics, I highly recommend you do so if you're looking for any of these supports, because it's one-to-one, it's free, and it will be able to cater this support to your particular facts and circumstances. So I highly recommend you avail of them if you can. And finally, then, in the context of these supports, is job opportunities with AsIAM employment partners. So, AsIAM has partnered with a number of companies who have engaged AsIAM in this partnership accreditation process. So, what does that mean? It means that they have done a significant amount of work with AsIAM to review their internal policies and procedures, to engage in internal training for their staff, and have an ongoing dialogue with AsIAM as to how they can be more inclusive for autistic staff. And for those companies, AsIAM have listed them on their website, who those companies are, and they link into vacancy opportunities in those organizations. So that provides a level of comfort for you when you're looking for a job, that these organizations will likely be more understanding, accommodating, accepting of an autistic applicant than others, because they have actively engaged and done the work to be more inclusive. So if that is of interest to you, I highly recommend checking out those vacancies. Next up then is a very new scheme that's actually, excuse me, drink some water, that has been brought out by the Department of Social Protection in the last year. It's called the Work and Access Scheme. So this scheme is going to change the landscape as regards providing supports to employees with disabilities, including autistic employees. So this provides disability training for employers at a highly subsidized rate. So what we're finding now is that employers are engaging in neurodiversity training around inclusivity for autistic employees. so that managers, HR, staff are now becoming much more knowledgeable of what it means for a person to be autistic and what it means to work with an autistic person. Uh, and what we're also finding then is uh, the availability now of workplace needs assessments. So previously, you would not have been entitled to a workplace needs assessment in the past unless you acquired a disability in the course of your lifetime. Now, anyone who has a disability and is engaging in work can now get a workplace needs assessment funded, and that is going to be a game changer as regards facilitating reasonable accommodations for employees because now that removes the barrier for cost for employers and employees. The workplace needs assessment is carried out, and it's usually carried out by an occupational therapist who will then make a series of recommendations, being like, this is what's going to support this employee to work effectively, to feel they can work best in the workplace. Uh, and then there is a huge amount of funding available from the government uh, to actually provide those employees with access to those accommodations. So from here on in, really, cost should not be an obstacle anymore for employers providing reasonable accommodations. And that message is getting out there to employers now. And what we're finding is that they are realizing that money isn't an issue anymore. And that is opening up doors towards more employers being much more willing to accommodate employees with disabilities and autistic applicants. And there's just some further information here in the PDF as to what that process looks like for the Work and Access scheme. There's also the work placement experience program. So this is actually organized through Department of Social Protection and Intro. This is also another potential route besides the AHEAD or WAM scheme, where you get an increased social welfare payment if you are willing to take up a work placement experience program with one of Intro's partner employers. They may be private sector, public sector. And now there is a minimum requirement of 30 hours per week, but it is for 6 months duration. And as I said, it is so important to get that first job in your CV because once you get work experience, it's much easier then to find another job. It's just getting that first job is often, or that first entry on your CV post education in order to really bounce into the next role. And then we just have some other resources here that are particularly useful, we find. So first off, if any of you are interested in it, there's a detailed DCU study that was actually done with Gale Autism Services, who are actually also doing some presentations with AsIAm this month on the importance of transition programs to facilitating autistic people entering into the workplace. It's a very detailed study. I highly recommend it. It's worth a read if that interests you. Then there's also employability. So employability is the government scheme that provides support for employees with disabilities. In particular, they do provide job coaching, and I know that they provide job coaching for autistic employees and job seekers. So that is also an avenue that I would thoroughly recommend. Just moving on to one I really want to flag is actually if you are perchance anyone here from DCU, the DCU Access to the Workplace scheme does hold a couple of spots specifically for neurodivergent students who are looking to get work placement. It's a placement scheme for students who come from marginalized groups. And I am aware of some students who've previously been on the scheme who are autistic and have now gotten fantastic work placements arising out of that. And I know are going to go on to great careers coming out of that. I was at a talk that they were at last year, and really, if you happen to be in DCU, I really cannot recommend this enough as a potential work placement option for you. As I said, AHEAD and WAM is a very, very, very good option for you if you are in the further education and college space. I think you have to have in a national framework qualification level 6 qualification in order to access WAM. So if you are a secondary school graduate, this may not be an option, but as I said, the work placement experience program then may be a potential alternative or other placement programs. But if you are a college or further education graduate, the AHEAD and WAM programs I would highly, highly recommend if you are thinking that a placement would facilitate you getting into a permanent employment role in the future. And then finally, as I said, work placement experience program and the citizens information. Citizens information also has much of the information that's on the screen, but it does contain some additional information which people may find helpful. Um, Before we move on to the ease and transition to the workplace, Mairead, just checking, is there any questions coming up?
So we've no questions yet. So if anybody wants to pop a question into the chat box now relating to that first piece, you're welcome to do so. And those questions will go directly to, they can only be viewed by Mark and I. So feel free to type something in there now. Just we'll take a little break.
Sorry, I think people are raising hands, which may mean that they're
Oh,
not able to type in, I'm wondering.
oh, okay, right. Wait, let's see. Can I? Um, okay, I've just put in a question in the chat box to everybody. Can you type a question now? And just to see, will anyone type back? Mm,
I'm suspecting that the functionality
right.
to
Okay. Um, okay. Yeah. So maybe there's an issue, but as you said earlier on, Mark, if you're not able to access the chat box, you can email your questions to me directly, and we have my email address on the last slide. It's just employmentgroups@asiam.ie, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So I'm sorry if it's not working, but perhaps nobody has a question yet. Maybe that's
no,
it, Mark. Yeah.
I
Mm,
expect if there's a possibility, is it?
okay. Do you want me to allow? Um, maybe I'll see.
I think I might push. I
Um,
think I might push on.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
just conscious of the amount of content and
Sure. Yeah.
and then genuinely, if people do want to email in, we'll try our best to respond to those emails, queries after the session. And apologies for this technical glitch, everyone. So just moving on to easing transition into the workplace. So assuming that you've got your placement, your internship, or going directly into the role, you're thinking, okay, how do I uh, make this transition, smoother than possible? Um, when I was considering drafting this, I had to realize I don't know what particular workplace any of you are potentially going to end up in. Um, so I think it's all about focusing on yourself, your own particular needs, um, and taking kind of a personal inventory of what's most important for you to make sure that you're emotionally regulated, your sensory hyper sensitivities are managed. Um, and for me personally, and I don't want to speak in generalizations, but I think reducing the level of uncertainty that I face going to the workplace would be one of my highest priorities. So, for instance, I was considering, what are my sensory sensitivities for me? I have hypersensitive hearing, so I don't go anywhere without my loops, my noise canceling headphones. Um, a very common question is dress code. I often, as a typical thing, would say, what should I wear before I go into this? And I would recommend that as well to avoid that potential anxiety that may come up with trying to figure out on the day, I don't know if I'm meant to wear this. I don't know if I'm meant to wear that. Ask the question before you start to say, what is the dress code? What should I wear? Um, I would say then just asking them, where am I meant to go on this first day? Please specify exactly where I'm meant to go, at what time. Can you give me an outline of what my first day is going to look like? Please provide me details of who I am meeting. And I've seen this before, and I do this quite a bit now for events that I'm going to. I would say, can you just please provide me the details of who I'm meeting? Ideally, if I could be provided with a bio, and I highly recommend this is LinkedIn. Uh, Go on, if you don't have a LinkedIn already, I would suggest setting one up because it's so useful for figuring out who it is that you're potentially meeting because they will generally have quite a lot of information on their page. They will generally have a photo up on their profile, and you can use that to figure out, okay, I understand who I'm meant to be meeting on day one. I have an understanding of what their position is in the company. I have an understanding of their background, where they studied, what their profile may give an overview of what it is that they do. So I think that uh, is very important to do if you don't have it done already. And I know actually as part of some of the ahead webinars or seminars and conferences that are coming up, they even do some LinkedIn photo shoots to get professional headshots done for you. So I think that's very useful for you when you're setting up your LinkedIn. As for the first day, always be thinking about how can I get more information? How can I ensure that I'm most comfortable on that first day? And asking, can I just drop into the office before the first day actually happens sometimes? Can I just have a quick walk around? Can you give me a quick tour? Very often you'll find workplaces do facilitate this, and that can be a great level or a great way of reducing the anxiety you may feel before your first day. Um, Again, then I would say this is probably one of the best ongoing supports you can have is being assigned a mentor or a buddy. So a buddy is usually somebody who is maybe close in level to you. They may be someone who is with the business for a year, a year or 2 years, and they have gone through the process of joining the business not too far in the past. So they're able to give you a lot of insights of what to expect, what to do, and they're going to be someone who you can generally ask a lot of questions of as regards kind of the onboarding, the support, the real kind of I don't know what's going on questions because they have been through that process the same as you have, and they will be very happy to provide you the answers to those questions. Another great support I have found is a mentor. A mentor is somebody who's usually been with the business for quite a long time, but isn't necessarily your manager. And they are somebody who can provide you with guidance and support for questions that you may be wanting to ask somebody, but you may not be comfortable asking your manager because for one reason or another, you say, oh, I don't want to, you know, you may just not want to ask your manager that particular question, but a mentor, you will be willing to answer that because you don't have that manager employee kind of relationship. So being assigned a buddy, being assigned a mentor can be hugely beneficial. And then obviously agreeing accommodations in advance can be something very beneficial, particularly if you are, let's say, availing of the AHEAD or WAM program, because before you even enter into the workplace, you will have already or made those supports. The word I want to use is implemented or available on your first day, as opposed to something that is kind of in the process of being negotiated over the kind of the weeks you first join the business. So then we move into sensory understanding. So this is something that I think is where that would be very useful to do in the context of the tour, if you were able to get that tour before your first day, because you can generally get a sense then of what is going on in the physical environment of this workplace that is going to impact on my hyposensory sensitivities. So what you have to consider again, lighting, if you are someone that lighting, sight, that can trigger your sensitivities. Dress codes, if tactile, the feel of certain clothing or even uniforms, if that's something that's going to impact on you. Um, then there's just kind of the general background noise of things, and this is something that I find particularly for myself. Uh, Computers, the sound of lighting, if it's fluorescent lighting, for instance, if there's background conversations happening, where are you going to be sitting? Can they give you that information? Because that will impact on how you're going to feel over the course of a day. And be aware as well that this can change while you may not have they may not impact on you immediately while you're sitting down in a particular location. Over time, and maybe the cumulative impact of sitting in that position for a number of hours uh, can have an impact. So then consider movement breaks. Can you work in different locations in the office for periods of time in order to give yourself a rest or um, reduce the load of that impact on your sensitivities? Um, and then the potential supports are there as well. And I think these are items and supports that you would be well aware of coming from an education background, but just conscious that when you move into a workplace, you may have much more of a fixed location depending on your job. So for instance, if you're in an office, you may have an assigned seat, um, or you may not. You may have what's known as a hot desking situation. Both have pros and cons. So obviously, an assigned seat is amazing if you like that structure, you like the certainty of knowing where you're going to be every day, um, as compared to a hot desk where you don't have that level of certainty. At the same time, though, if you have an assigned seat and it's not in a location that's conducive to you because you're beside a noisy printer or you're underneath a light that's flickering, well, then it would be a case of just saying to the sooner rather than later to say, actually, can I be moved to another location, please? Or can we do something or request an accommodation to that would allow me to uh, accommodate my sensory needs? Because it is very important for you to take care of yourself, okay? And to communicate your needs to your employer as well in a way so that you're able to work most effectively, because that is what an employer wants to see. They want to be able to work most effectively with you. And to an extent, they really need to hear from you how your particular needs manifest. Because as the saying goes, if you met one person with autism, you met one person with autism. So while an employer, particularly, you know, there's many employers out there now who are getting much more of a knowledge of autism. Autism is going to manifest differently for every person, and their particular traits and sensitivities are going to be different. So there's a level of advocacy that's required. And when you find an employer who is inclusive and accommodating, that conversation can be so beneficial for both parties because it means that you feel cared, included, and accommodated by the employer, and the employer is in a position where they're saying, ah, fantastic. My employee feels included, cared for. They are going to be much more effective in the job, and that is ultimately what an employer wants to see. So, moving on then to a kind of workplace communication and interaction. And it goes back to an earlier theme that I was talking about, which is managing uncertainty in the workplace. Speaking personally for myself, I have a very low tolerance for uncertainty. I need to know where I'm going, what I'm doing, who will be there, and what the agenda will be over the course of that day. And changes to that I can find distressing. And to that end, I've made that clear to my employer in the past to be I need as much knowledge as possible communicated to me in a very direct, unambiguous way. Um, there is a lot of unwritten rules in the workplace. And you will find that that is going to be the case regardless of whatever format of workplace you find yourself in, whether that's in retail, whether that's in an office, whether it's in manufacturing. There's going to be the unwritten rules and norms of that particular workplace. And I would suggest, whether it's through your buddy, whether it's through your manager, don't be afraid to ask them to make those unwritten rules clear to you. Uh, Ask them to make the implicit explicit because it is so important that everybody realizes that we all need to be understanding a common context. We all need to understand the norms to be able to work effectively together. And they need to understand that it is, oh, we have a chat. Oh, I think we actually have questions are able to come in. Sorry, that is fantastic. Um, okay, great. So we do have some questions that are able to come in. That's great. Sorry. Uh, moving back to the social norms. Yes, just don't be afraid to ask them to make the unwritten rules explicit. Um, don't be afraid to ask for communication that is clear and unambiguous. Coming from my own personal perspective, I spent so many hours trying to divine what particular emails meant due to unclear language. And I was so afraid to ask what the person meant or clarify what they were asking for because I didn't want to appear that I didn't understand. I was so afraid to make it look like I didn't understand. And that was so emotionally draining when I could have just asked the question. And the person on the other side would have appreciated me asking the question because it saves time. It would saves everyone time. So uh, it can be scary. It can feel daunting to do this, to ask for this kind of clarity and clarification. But I would strongly recommend in the long run, start building up that ability because it's a skill, and it's a skill that once you do it more and more and more, you will develop it and it will become so natural to you to just ask for this clear instruction, and it will help you in the long run, genuinely. And in this context as well, you have to consider your own personal communication preference. So we are now thankfully in a world where we have so much flexibility in the way that we communicate. So whether it's with your manager, whether it's within the team that you're working with, agree what mode of communication works best for you. Some people, the thought of doing a phone call is just so stressful and daunting, they don't want to do it. For other people, it's doing a face-to-face meeting, whether that's in person or on Teams, can be incredibly stressful or distressing. And others, asynchronous communication is where they find that they're most easily able to process and distill information, understand it, and then respond. So whether it's communicating to your manager, actually, if you can give me those instructions in the email, that will give me an ability to digest it and formulate a reply to you. Whether it's you need time to process verbal information, and certainly it was happened a case for me is that you're dealing with your manager, for instance, and they communicate something to you and you're still processing it. And you may just say to them, I just need a little bit more time to process this. I'll just give me a few moments to gather my thoughts so that you don't feel pressured to reply before you've even had a chance to process. Other situations might be instant messaging. What we find, it'll be very common if any of you are looking to go into an office context, is that emails are used very much for formal communication, while instant messaging is used for informal updates or quick requests. And unfortunately, those requests can also come with a complete lack of context. So, for instance, drop into my office. Um, a drop into my office instant message to me would have scared me so much because I don't understand the context for this. And I would have assumed, okay, is it going to be bad news? Am I going to be given out to? Is this about some other massive project? I don't know. And what I found is if I just started asking for them, can you please provide some additional context? Just a little thing to say, can you please drop into my office to discuss the work you just did on this thing? And that just request for that little bit of additional context removed so much anxiety for me. And it's such a simple, just additional thing for managers and colleagues to do that it is very, it feels like a big request you're making of them, but it really isn't. And I would just ask that, again, reflect on what you need to work effectively, reflect on what style of communication, whether it's in person, verbal, or written out an email, works best for you to process information, and then see how you can make that work with your employer. See if there's a way of balancing that with their needs as well. And then obviously consider your sensory requirements as well. So if you are in a situation where you are, yes, able to do face-to-face meetings, but if there's noise happening in the background and therefore you can't understand or process what's being said to you because of distracting noise or another sensory situation, say to the manager, can we actually just pause for a moment while we or commute or talk in a different location or talk maybe in a different method for now because of this distracting thing. And that's very important because at the end of the day, your managers and colleagues want you to understand what they're saying. And effective communication is the bedrock of of a workplace. So if at any point you feel that there isn't effective communication happening, really do ask for support and ask for ways of in changing that environment to ensure that effective communication can happen. And these are just some tips that we often see from the community. So again, keep instructions clear and direct. So don't move the goalposts. That is something we often find is that just structure the work in a way that it's very clear what is being asked for, and such that when you do the work, it's not a case then at the end they say, oh, we wanted actually something a bit different. Say what you mean what you say. That comes up so much. Be patient and allow time for understanding. That's the point I was saying before about them talking to you, and you just need that little bit of time after they finish speaking just to allow it all to download and process. Even just an additional 10 seconds sometimes makes a world of difference. And again, clear language, phrasing means so much and saves, speaking personally for myself, so much time for me and so much mental energy and so much emotional energy too. Uh, Moving on then to self-care. Sorry, I'm just checking the time. This is probably one of the main parts I want to flag. If you want to just take anything away from this evening, obviously the supports of moving into the workplace, it's probably this. You are more important than your job, is probably what I would say. No job is worth you and your physical or mental health being damaged. So whenever you go into the workplace, ensure your own personal safety. So whatever you need to do to emotionally regulate, um, see how you can do that. So if you are in a workplace and you feel safe to stim. If that's what you need in order to calm yourself in that situation, have compassion for yourself. And this is something I often find with myself in the past or coaching autistic staff is there can be a tendency to really, really be perfectionist and to work harder and longer hours in order to get the work done because we're trying to prove something to ourselves or to other people. And sometimes we do that to the detriment of ourselves. Okay. We are different. We are not, we don't have deficit, we're not disordered. We have strengths and in some areas we have challenges. And it's okay to ask for help in areas that we may find are a bit harder for us than others. And what you find is that you may be much better than in certain aspects of the job than other people as well. And it's okay then to provide help to other people in those aspects. This is what it means to be in a workplace. It means asking for help in certain areas that you're not so good at, and it means helping others in certain areas that they're not so good at. There's give and take there, okay? Um, and I would just say if you're doing this, you just need to always remember um, your mental health is so important. So if you are in work and you are in a situation where you're feeling overwhelmed, because work can be stressful, and there's no denying that. Um, but if you're in a situation where you feel that the stress is going to be getting too much, uh, I would recommend finding a safe place where you feel, okay, this is a private place where I can go if I ever feel so overwhelmed that I may need to have a meltdown or a shutdown, or I can just get away from the sensory overload that may be occurring in that situation. Where that may be may vary from workplace to workplace. Some workplaces may have sensory rooms. Some workplaces may have meeting rooms that are available generally. And it's just a good idea sometimes to find out where those places may be ahead of time, just in case you ever need to utilize them. Um, Another point then I would say, and it's just something we find happening quite a bit, always just remember to take care of your basic needs. You know, good food, your diet, just exercise, ensure you're getting your sleep. You know, these things should be top priorities for you always. Because if any of these start falling away, then your ability to emotionally regulate, your ability to I would say, executive function inside and work, all of those will be damaged, which will just make your capacity to absorb stress lower, which leads into a kind of a vicious cycle. So I would just stress food, exercise, sleep are so important. Um, Balance work with joy as well. So work only takes up a certain amount of hours in your day or a certain amount of hours in your week. It's great to be having a job and it's great to have purpose and it's great to be getting paid. Use that money to reward yourself, whatever it is that brings you joy. Make sure you balance out work with something that gives you joy, something that gives you energy, something that allows you to replenish yourself. Um, because work shouldn't be everything or all encompassing for your life. And if you are facing issues in the workplace, let your manager know if it's safe to do so and avail of employee assistance programs if they are there. Um, Talk to your buddy or mentor if you feel safe to do so, or reach out to the likes of AsIAm on the confidential helpline as well, and they can provide you with some supports. I'll just touch on some final points here, Mairead, as well, just related to disclosure in the workplace. So these will be topics I think that are more appropriate for one-to-one clinics if you're making decisions about what you want to do around disclosure and reasonable accommodations. But it's just to say, disclosure, it's kind of a awkward word. It makes it feel like you're hiding something, but it's kind of the common word. Much prefer myself to say I'm sharing my autism with somebody else, or I'm sharing my neurodivergence. But for these purposes, we'll use the word disclosure. So it's informing someone of your disabilities, whether or not you wish to disclose to a workplace, whether it's in the context of an interview process or whether it's after you've got a job, is entirely up to you. You may feel you want to disclose because you are proud of your autistic identity. And if that's the case, that's a very courageous decision. It may be the case that you wish to disclose because you wish to access reasonable accommodations, whether that's with the interview process or in work. Uh, and that is a very important aspect of the of disclosure as well, because an employer is only obligated to provide reasonable accommodations to you if they are actually aware of your disability or that they are aware that you are autistic. So if you do wish to access reasonable accommodations, disclosure is a necessary part of that process. I would just to say as well is disclosure is not an an all or nothing. If you disclose, it doesn't mean that everyone knows. Disclosure can be as limited as you need it to be in order to get the supports you require. So it may be just the case of your manager and a person in HR knowing. Any professional employer should treat it in strict confidence and not let people know beyond what the minimum amount of people is required to tell for these situations. Okay. So, and I would just, as a final point about disclosure, is it can be daunting. It may be something that you haven't done outside of, friends and family. Um, you may not necessarily get the response you like from your manager if you do disclose to them. And I've seen this happen myself. And I've never had a bad experience, but I've had situations where they didn't know what to say back to me when I disclosed I was autistic. Uh, and it's not to say that it wasn't that they had a bad reaction. They just didn't know. And I could see in their eyes that they didn't know what to say. And afterwards, we had good conversations about it, and they said, I didn't, I just didn't know. At the time, I was a little bit down about the reaction, but on further reflection, I realize they're really good people, and it's just education, and then talking to them about what autism looks like for me, and bringing that understanding with them. Has really helped our relationship going forward. And they've gone and gotten kind of further education in the autism on what autism means more widely as well. So that's been a fantastic opportunity. So as I said, then the reasonable accommodations piece, uh, employers are obliged to provide you with reasonable accommodations to ensure effective participation in the workplace, unless the measures would result in a disproportionate burden for the employer. Now, what constitutes a disproportionate burden? It would mean if they had to spend, you know, a lot of money or beyond what their resources allow for, or it would be, a massive change in working practices that they're just not able to accommodate. But the thing is, now that they have the Work and Access program out there, there is so much funding available to employers now, so such that really financial costs shouldn't be an obstacle anymore for employers. So what we are now seeing is that employers really don't have much in the way of arguments anymore for not providing reasonable accommodations. So know that the duties on employers to provide reasonable accommodations are there. They're quite strong. So you can be assured that employers are taking that duty very seriously. And we just provide some general list of reasonable accommodations that we often find in the workplaces here. Then you can review these at your leisure. I think, Mairead, that brings us just to some final comments, I think, about some upcoming events. I think I've touched on these already at the start. The AsIAm Employment Seminar we've already touched on at the end of the month. These are the booking links, guys, if you want to take part in the employment programs. So, as I said, they're Calendly links. Online or in person, I believe, Mairead, you can book into, and as well the employment program newsletter.